Good morning, everyone, or evening, wherever you may be. My talk today is concerning taste. Incidentally, this is a presentation I prepared in 2010, and in going back to refresh it, I ended up spending quite a bit more time than I at first anticipated, considering the topic, and also hopefully bringing more insights into it. So let's begin. In 2011, my really dear friend and I went to see this amazing film called The Perfect Sense. It was showcased at the Seattle International Film Festival. And this movie, unfortunately, did not make it into wide release. I doubt that you've even heard of it. But it really left an impression. It was such a fantastic experience. As many of the events and movies that I've seen at the Seattle International Film Festival are, they tend to be very interesting, one-time only events. And this movie in particular really struck a chord for many reasons. It's somewhat of a sci-fi movie, and it really depicts an epidemic that begins to spread throughout the globe, causing humankind to lose their sensory perceptions one by one. The main point of the movie is a focus on these two people, Ewan McGregor and I apologize, I forget the other actress's name, but Ewan is a chef, and he is a pretty happy chef working at a very busy restaurant located next to Susan's apartment. So they meet and they get to know each other. She is an epidemiologist who is investigating the causes of this very odd epidemic that's spreading throughout the globe. And as they begin their own personal relationship, they begin to understand more and more about what this disease is causing. Now, it begins with humans losing their senses one at a time, and each loss of a sense is predicated by an outburst of an intense feeling of emotion and urges. First, people begin suffering uncontrollable bouts of crying, and this is soon followed by their sense of smell. An outbreak of irrational panic and anxiety is closely followed by a bout of frenzied gluttony, and that precedes the loss of the sense of taste. And the film portrays people trying to adapt to each of these sensory losses by trying to carry on living as best as they can, rediscovering the remaining senses that they do have as best as they can. And so Michael and his coworkers at the restaurant begin to cook food for people who cannot smell, who cannot taste. So they have to replicate other experiences like crunch and different palate senses with people who can't taste or smell. Afterwards comes the loss of hearing, and Michael, part of these outrages that begin the sense loss, in this case was a really huge rage and outburst of hatred. And so Michael has this crazy experience, and he really yells at Susan, and so they kind of have a split. And of course she knows that this is part of the disease. It wasn't really Michael's doing, but nevertheless you can't really forgive. And so as people struggle to go on, realizing their lives and knowing that basically the martial environment is taking over, the government is really just trying to figure out how to keep people in check when they do these crazy outbursts out in the middle of, traffic and situations, and how to maintain some semblance of society. Afterwards, people begin to lose their eyesight, and the couple included, they realize that they were really meant for each other, and she finally forgives him. And they find each other and embrace as they both begin to lose their sight. So it's an interesting movie. Obviously, it's kind of dramatic, but it left me feeling a sense of what would that be like if you just completely lost your sense of taste. Now, of course, recently Frank had somewhat of an experience along those lines. Got me thinking about that. I had been making a salad using some pine nuts one evening, and then the next day Frank had this really terrible taste in his mouth, this metallic, bitter taste. Everything that he tasted was bitter. And what was worse is that this went on for a full week. As he began to think about what was wrong with him, he was worried. He did a couple Google searches on his symptoms, and discovered that he had had a similar bad reaction to the pine nuts in the salad that many other people had had. There was a certain variety of pine nuts coming out of China that maybe weren't really edible, and nonetheless they made it into the food distribution system, and we bought them at a well-renowned grocery store. So thankfully he got over that. His sense of taste came back. But now we're a bit more cautious, especially when it comes to pine nuts, because that experience, having really no sense of taste for a week was pretty profound and pretty terrible. Now, of course, I'm very familiar with acquired tastes and tastes that we have no control over. If you know anything about me, you should know that I hate onions. I really hate them. Since I was a fetus, in fact, I've hated onions. I wouldn't even let my mom go near them, and she's Mexican and loves onions, and everything in Mexican food has onions in it. But when she was pregnant with me, there was no way she could even enter a room where an onion was sitting. I don't know what it is about my brain and my physiology that causes this intense revulsion. I do know a lot of other friends who have a similar hatred of different tastes, such as cilantro, green peppers, mushrooms, fish, and it's not even like a allergy per se where they're going to blow up. I'm not allergic. I'm not going to die from eating onions, and I have in the past, but they just make me very, ugh, I just don't like them. So our taste is very much linked to our childhood experiences and our individual neurology and physiology. Some tastes we can acquire over time, and like salt, we may even develop a preference for foods that are heavy in a certain experience. But there is good news, and you can reboot your taste buds by eating really fresh foods, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Forgive me, I'm not scrolling here. In researching this presentation, I ran across these ladies who are professional sensory experience consultants. They can detect subtle nuances of flavor and texture and are experts in detailed sensory design and evaluation for corporate clients, predominantly big name consumer product companies. So their names are Gail Vance Seville and Judy Haleman, and they were featured in Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, as experts in their field. And so there was an interview that I listened to with them asking what it takes to be a sensory expert. And one thing they said is, well, basically you just have to have all the right components in place. You have to have your teeth screwed on straight, you have to know how to chew, and it really just takes a lot of practice. And more than that, it's about keeping your mind open to possibilities, that what you see on your plate may not necessarily be what you taste. And so they help to their corporate companies expect what consumers are looking for and how to link their products with what consumers like. So they can take down a taste to a gnat's eyelash level. So for example, say somebody has a taste of cola. They'll say, well, it tastes like Coca-Cola. And they would go down further and taste the brown spices and the flavors, and even down to the chemical compositions of what that flavor compound might be. And one thing I love that they say is part of their experience is that they love going, when they travel, going through a city and smelling it at dinner time. And different locations, even different neighborhoods, will have a different sense and a different smell. And in America, what their experience says is that Americans really love caramel, that burnt taste, the crunchiness, whether it's in meats. We have toasted and roasted meats. We have bread, mostly toasted breads. We also really like vanilla, such as in ice cream and cookies and cereal, and of course vanilla goes really well with our favorite flavor, caramel. Now, another flavor experience, obviously, that's not necessarily great for us, but because of consumer products and having longer shelf lives, salt gets added to a lot of things. And in fact, it's kind of a hidden taste, sodium, in fact. It may not even taste salt, but there could be a ton of sodium, even in such a thing as like a milkshake from a fast food restaurant can have a ton of sodium because it really helps to mask all of the not so great things and to give a product longer shelf life. And I'm not here to say what's good or bad. It's, that's just the way that our consumer society has come down, in that we have a vast abundance of food, but sometimes that food has to be sitting in a warehouse for a while and transported and processed and before it even gets to you. So in April of 2010, there was a report by the Institute of Medicine that found that high salt levels in the supermarket and restaurant foods should be declared unsafe by the federal government and the FDA, and so that the FDA should set a maximum sodium level on food. And in fact, salt is the trifecta of the food industry with sugar and fat that comprise many of the ingredients in our foods, including in restaurants, especially if you have a chain restaurant meal. Usually we'll have a very coordinated and profiled taste experience for your $10 meal. And they use this to trick our tongues into thinking that the product is just as delicious as we remember it when our grandmother made that meatball and spaghetti sauce that you're eating at the chain restaurant. Salt and sugar also serve to mask unpleasant flavors that develop as a result of the food processing. And as we know, Americans consume more and more prepared meals. We don't cook as much at home, and so part of it is our flavor palettes, whether we like it or not, have been changed by our lifestyle and just our environment. And one way to begin to reverse that change, ironically, is also through more restaurants. This is a picture of one of my favorite restaurants here in Seattle, Plum Bistro. And part of their experience to try to convert people into a vegan lifestyle, they recently purchased and outfitted a new food truck. So Plum Burgers is going around the city showing folks how you can experience a really healthy way to live, but yet not having to miss all of that meatiness and the umami and the flavors. And you can't really see it there, but along the side of the truck, I love their motto. It says, changing the way you taste. So beginning to say, you know what, maybe we don't need to have all of that meat and processed food and dairy, and we can still enjoy and have a wonderful experience in our dining without having all of those crazy ingredients that maybe aren't as sustainable or healthy for you or healthy for the earth. So vegetarian and vegan lifestyles are definitely something that is advocated as part of Tao cultivation, not because we want to have this very rigorous health cult, but it's more understanding how our bodies react to the ingredients that we put into them and making sure that they align with the path that we want to live, what's going to be the most sustainable, the most healthy, the thing that's going to nourish and fuel you to pursue your dreams and to live a really healthy lifestyle. I always come back to our trip to Taiwan because it was just completely life-changing and such an amazing experience. And for me, if Derek and Bill recall, I had my camera out all the time, and instead of taking photographs of the landscape or the people, I was just always focused on the food. Every meal I took so many photos of, and this is one of the really amazing meals that we had, one of many, and for me the most important and wonderful aspect of eating in Taiwan with our tour group is that I didn't have to worry about what I was putting in my mouth. Everything looked very strange and different, and I was not accustomed to it. But I knew, number one, that because of this cultivation and our passion for vegetarianism, everything was going to be vegan. There was not going to be any concern about animal products entering my body because I've been vegetarian for a long time. But more importantly, that one hatred that I do have of onions was removed because in our cultivation in this type of diet, no onions or garlic are used. And granted, I like garlic. I've told you that before. It really just comes down to what your preferences are. But in this case, during the trip, everything was just incredibly delicious. And I've never really had that experience before where I didn't have to question, what's on my plate here? Is it safe for me to eat? And that's something that I go through in my daily life as a vegetarian in the United States. Granted, I still eat a little bit of seafood, and still, those tastes are amazing what they were able to do with so many different complex vegetables and grains and nuts. But this is a picture of one of my most favorite dishes, hands down, period, ever in life. And all it was just fruit. But it was very carefully selected fruit, carefully curated, beautifully prepared. The most simple thing on earth is what nature brought to us. So a little bit of mango, a little bit of pineapple, and some clementines, and they were the most amazing taste experiences that I've ever had, and the care and delight that I took in eating it reflected all the love and passion that went into preparing just even this one simple meal. But with that, I am a foodie, and I still love experiencing all sorts of things. And one of my favorite experiences during that trip to Taiwan was going to this restaurant that was so incredible. It was a buffet, everything was vegetarian, but it was kind of high end. And what you see here in the front is a plate of vegetarian sushi, and it's incredible because it looks so similar to salmon. And I gotta tell you, it actually tasted very similar in texture and flavor in every aspect, similar to salmon, but it was completely vegetarian. I have no idea what kind of magic that they spun to be able to make this product, but it was astounding. I found it really incredible that the ingenuity that went into creating this really, frankly, simple dish, that other chefs would just go into the ocean and take out a fish and slice it up. Meanwhile, these chefs had to do something more ingenious, and it still tasted really amazing. And that reminded me of this really amazing restaurant in Chicago called Alinea, taking taste to the nth degree, figuring out how to deconstruct, how to take something that may not even be in your mind, but really bringing it to the most wonderful level. At Alinea, a typical 23-course meal, yes, it's a very long menu, and you don't really get a choice. There is no menu. You just sit down and you are plated. The meal at this restaurant might include things like olive oil lollipops, sweet potatoes skewered by smoking cinnamon sticks, strips of bacon hanging from stainless steel bow, and pheasant tempura fried with apple cider, impaled on a flaming oak leaf. Often the meals are accompanied by these pillows with little holes that emanate these aromas. So it's not necessarily that you're eating the pillow or whatever is inside, but that creates an experience, whether it's being at the beach or being at a bonfire. And literally, I've heard that people have cried because the sensory experience along with the food brings them back to these memories of childhood that they haven't even remembered for many, many years, but just the combination have really moved people to tears, and that's kind of so impressive. And the chef, he says, what makes the food that we do at Alinea so interesting on the outside is that we really don't let ourselves say no to an idea. When we start looking at things really critically, even very simply, we realize that there's not more than one way to get the same results. You're deconstructing the components of a course and putting them back together. Playing with unexpected flavors and scents is the main reason for this restaurant being. His dishes, like I said, are served along these little pillowcases that emit fragrances for diners to enjoy. The chef says, we've done firewood ashes, we've done leather, we've done grass. There's a lot of smells that you don't necessarily consume. You're not going to go out and chew on a baseball glove. But in a lot of ways, a lot of smells that aren't necessarily edible smell very good and remind you of certain aspects of food. So making those associations with what smells good or what smells a certain way, pairing with the actual edible ingredients, is one avenue that we take our creativity. What I find fascinating about this restaurant and the concept of what they're doing, in addition to just the fantastic molecular magic that they make with these ingredients, is that the chef, Grant Schatz, in 2007, he actually lost his ability to taste. He was diagnosed with stage 4 tongue cancer, which metastasized on both sides of his neck. His surgeons told him that they were going to have to cut out his tongue and replace it with a muscle from another part of his body. With that surgery, he would be able to live, but he'd have a 50% chance of surviving beyond 2 years. So he understood that this was a very dire circumstance. But what he says is that he was even more afraid of losing his ability to taste and to eat. Grant says, I lived my whole life in the kitchen. Not only that, but it's the passion, it's the love of cooking and food. It's dictated my entire life, every aspect of it. So in some ways, the thought of not being able to do that anymore radically affects your life. So he was able to participate in a clinical trial at the University of Chicago with very intensive radiation and chemotherapy. those treatments completely burned his tongue, shed the lining of his esophagus, and he completely lost all of his taste buds. He said it was very strange not to be able to discern any flavor at all. It's funny because clearly you know you have to eat to live. But even knowing that, for him, there was no reason to eat. He says, I had no interest in eating whatsoever. I would put something in my mouth, say a vanilla milkshake, and it tasted like nothing. So his cancer is in remission, and after his treatment ended, his ability to taste slowly started coming back, as also his perception of different flavor combinations between sweet and salty and bitter. What's interesting is that those combinations and those taste experiences started coming back one at a time. He says, I started from zero, and the first thing back was sweet. And if we think about it as infants, one of the first things we have, if you are lucky and there are no complications in your birth, is mother's milk. And the predominant flavor of mother's milk is sweetness. So his flavor palate developed just as a newborn, he says, but he was 32 years old, so I could understand now how flavors are coming back and how they synergize together. It was very educational for me. I don't recommend it, but it made me think, made me a better chef now because I really understand how flavor works. His story is really interesting and so fascinating to me because my second mother, my aunt, Angela, she also had cancer and also went through chemotherapy. And she too lost her sense of taste. She didn't really want to eat, and who can blame her? You know, whatever you put in your mouth tastes either terrible or nothing at all. And so she ended up losing a lot of weight until the cancer therapy was over, and then she got a little bit of weight back. Unfortunately, we did lose her to ovarian cancer in 2008, but she was able to have some really great moments with us. And the thing about her losing her sense of taste was the worst because my aunt was the one that gave me the passion for cooking and the passion for eating and for cooking for people. And the fact that it was just so sad that, you know, she wanted to taste, but she really couldn't. And that idea, similarly with this chef, Granta Schatz, when he lost his ability to taste and he had a very limited time potentially to live, as his doctors and diagnoses were telling him, he really sat down and thought, you know, what do I want to do? I've only got this limited time. Well, the truth is, he said to himself, I'm already doing what I want to do. Everything I've done in my life has come to this point to have my own restaurant, to cook the food that I want. And I have employees that are committed to me, and what I need to do is just get up and do my job. And that is what he did every day, which was an inspiration to everyone, not just his employees, but his customers and food reviewers and everyone to say, you know, even the one most basic thing as a chef you should have is your sense of taste. He was able to say, that's okay, I need to just continue moving on. And more importantly, he had built this organization that his sense of taste had been outsourced already to his sous chefs, so they knew what and how to create the visions that he had already imagined. So with that, I'm going to end with somewhat of a broad side, a little bit of a left turn here. What's good taste? So I talked about this movie at the beginning, A Perfect Sense, and it was filmed or shown at the Seattle International Film Festival in 2011. And many of you may never have heard of it, and you probably won't even see it. But you probably have heard of this other great blockbuster happening right now, The Guardians of the Galaxy. And this gentleman, Chris Anderson, wrote a book called The Long Tail, and how in our culture and society now, you know, it used to be that unless you saw that one movie at the movie theater on that particular date and time, otherwise you would never have seen it or even heard of it. But we have the internet now where we have such an access to a great variety of resources from books and literature and culture and religion that we are able to participate in much better ways and grander ways than we ever have in the past. So I'll have another talk about good taste, cultural taste in the future. But I find it fascinating that I can sit here and talk to you about my week and thinking about taste buds. So with that, I'm going to end. There's no recipe today. I think the most important thing is to hone your sense of taste, to really step back. If you have a diet of eating out a lot or packaged foods or you know, fast foods, maybe you can take a little bit of time to step back. Your life is maybe so busy, and that may never be an opportunity for you to come home and make your own meals. Maybe you don't have all the tools or the time. But nonetheless, I think it's important to be present and contemplate. And so I suggest that this week maybe you can take a little time to do a taste test. If you can only go and purchase a couple apples, see what they taste like. What's the difference, and how do they grow, and how do they experience in your tongue? So with that, hopefully you'll have a little bit of something, food for thought to leave with this weekend. And thank you, everyone. One last thing I'm going to say is I will be with you for the next 2 weeks. Starting on Thursday, I'm going to be going to Jamaica with my Engineers Without Borders group. So that'll be a really fascinating experience. We'll be gone for 10 days. And I look forward to coming back and sharing with you some of my thoughts from that trip. Thank you, everyone.